Today we look at the topic of science and national development, which is found in your module 4 or course path 4. This is just a short presentation, but I would like to ask the students to read the whole of module 4. Some of the topics in module 4 we've taken up in post-normal science and science advice. But there are some aspects on science and national development planning which we haven't taken up yet. And so let's define some terms which are always in the media, especially if the media deals with science and technology issues, and also respect to our daily life when the newspapers and the media would report on economic development. And so let's define what development is. It's actually simply the advancement of human society. While economic development means the improvement of the social, economic, and political well-being of citizens, and usually economists would measure it by the growth of the gross domestic product or GDP. There are other measures like the Human Development Index, or even in some countries, the so-called happiness index, but most economists would use the gross domestic product as the metric or the measure of economic development. Now, in the past 60 years or even more, the idea was the economy would develop in a sort of linear manner, a linear development. First, your economy would start as underdeveloped, then eventually it will develop with more jobs and more service industries and more industries. And eventually it will become a developed economy in which it would be exporting a lot of services and also commodities. Now, in 1960, the economic historian Rostow from the US suggested that countries pass through 5 stages of economic development. And this is quite linear, really. At the first step, economies are in the so-called traditional phase in which they are dependent on subsistence, barter, and agriculture. And this was the general norm at the start of human civilization. Then later on, at the so-called transitional stage, when there's specialization and surpluses infrastructure, then with the surpluses, your economy begins to expand. And so you'll be able to export a few commodities. But on the stage 3, there's so-called economic takeoff, in which there is now industrialization, growing investment, resulting in regional growth and political change. The idea was, with the economic takeoff, the political system becomes more inclusive and democratic. But that's not always the case, as we will see later. Then at stage 4, there's a drive to maturity, diversification, innovation, and less reliance on imports and investments, in which the export products become more diverse, not just limited to certain classes like agriculture. Now it's possible that the country will be able to export high-end technology products. And that would be more the norm at the stage 5, or the so-called high mass consumption economy, which is consumer-driven, service-driven, goods are durable, and the service sector really becomes dominant. And each of the stages requires substantial investment in capital. The question we have to ask is, where will the capital come from? Should it be given as aid by other countries or foreign direct investments? Or should the citizens of a certain country generate enough capital to invest in their own industries? Now, these 5 stages of economic development has been used to come up with, to generalize the categories of economies around the world, having a developed and a developing economy. The ones in pink are definitely belonging to the developed economy or the developed world, while the ones in green are in the developing economy stage. But now the boundaries of these are rather blurred. For instance, the per capita income, nominal income of China doesn't really put that into the league of the developed countries. However, China has all the marks of a developed economy. It's highly exporting a lot of products. Its services sector is growing. And similarly, India is following the same trajectory, and a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia and even in Latin America and even in Africa. So the old idea of a developing and developed world based on the purely economic aspects of it all is starting to get a little bit blurred, the boundaries between the two. Now, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels came out with some ideas that are quite relevant to science and development strategies that a country may pursue. According to Marx and Engels, science does not operate in society independently, and that the important role of science in socio-economic development is a recent post-1750 phenomenon, as it favors the interests of the bourgeoisie. So all of these developments actually favor the growth of a middle class. That's according to Marx and Engels, the bourgeoisie. So the question is, the critical question is, if we use science and technology for development, where or to whom should the benefits of economic advancement go to? Now, we can answer that question later on. But now let's take a look at the so-called science and science pool theories. How would the economy advance with science push and science pull? What on earth is this? Okay, what is a technology push-driven economy and a market pull-driven economy with respect to the science and technology innovations that society would produce? In the technology push idea, you have research and development, then which would result in production of new innovations, which would be marketed. But the question is, to whom does it feel the need? Okay, usually it's the state that actually invests in research and development, and the state could direct to a certain extent what could be the need for the new technologies as determined by its science development priorities. In the market pull scenario, you have a need in the market, which would drive the research and development and the production and marketing and in more innovation. Until that market need is fulfilled, then perhaps there would be new needs for technology and science, which would result in more research and development. The question is, okay, that would be determined, okay, by the market, and who's the sector in the market that actually demands that new technology? Is it just one particular social class, socioeconomic class, or a lot of the different social classes in society? So this is a brief introduction to science and development issues, which you would find in your module 4. But let me just share module 4. Okay, we're dealing with science and policy development in module 4. Okay. So the question is really here is, how does science and technology contribute to development, and do government policies reflect the sound science or research-backed evidence? Okay, what's the role of public opinion, and so on. Now, in the Philippines, much of the science policy is actually in our laws right now. I would like you to read, and you can easily Google this from the official site of the Philippines government, the Declaration and Principle of State Policies in Article 2 of the Constitution of the Philippines, and Article 14, the education, science, technology, arts, and culture and sports. Now, the Philippines is one of the countries to have science and technology as a priority in national development. It's in the Constitution, even in the 1935 Constitution and all other constitutions that followed, like the 1973 and the present 1987 Constitution, have actually enshrined that principle that we need to develop our science and technology. Now, science and technology, while it's really important for national and economic development and contributes to the public good, really has to compete with other social and public services. Therefore, and it's all for the public good, and public good is set by policy. Science policy, which is the way by which the laws are implemented, is really the allocation of the resources of the state, mainly taken from taxpayers' contributions, for the conduct of science for the public good, and really would reflect how society supports science and how science is utilized in society. A society that values science and technology would likely have a larger budget for science research, okay, as compared to a society that does not place much importance in science and technology. Now, in the Philippines, the policies are set by the Constitution, by appropriate legislation or relevant legislation, and executive orders of the president, which in the implementing rules and regulations. And as I said earlier, the Philippines is the first country in the world to set the development of science and technology as a constitutional principle in the 1935 Constitution. So I would like to ask you to read some of these activities here. Okay? But unfortunately, we don't have time to really go deeper into it. Perhaps when you discuss a real case about the face-to-face class in COVID-19, you may use these principles to justify your position or science policy recommendations for how we can go back to school. Anyway, the Department of Science and Technology is the leading government department or ministry that deals with science and technology matters. And they have several research arms and development and councils. For example, the Advanced Science Technology Institute, PAG-ASA, PHIVOX, and some of the other sectoral councils are the PICARD, or the PSHRD, the PCHRD, and even NAMRIA, the National Mapping and Resource Authority. So they have a lot of other sub-agencies under it. And of course, the National Academy of Science and Technology, which is with DOST for administrative and fiscal reasons, but it is the chief science advisor to the government of the Philippines. Now, the problem in the country is what was the direction of science and technology in the Philippines, which has been reviewed so many times. So perhaps you can watch the video of, where did it go here? The video, but this is quite outdated. I hope they update it. Prometheus Bound, which is produced by Agham. Okay. And here, the scientists, the late Dean Posadas, okay, Dr. Henry Ramos, and now Dean of the College of Science, Gani Tapang, outlined the general state of science and technology in the Philippines, which is characterized as backward and competitive. The question is, why that is the case? Now, in other countries, the bourgeoisie and are really at the lead of innovation as the socio-economic class in the country. Okay, the middle classes and the bourgeoisie are actually in the lead to develop new technologies, such as in the other Asian countries. How come in the Philippines that did not happen? And this is the real gist of this video, which perhaps I would ask you to watch. And I'm asking you to watch it, review it. The late Chancellor Posadas proposes an economic catch-up by abandoning certain neoliberal economic policies, which means to put a little bit of more economic protection on some of our strategic industries that would require a lot of science and technology innovation. And so this is rather modified science push model, because in the neoliberal, in which investments may come from different sectors, but the policy is driven by market-driven forces. The market-driven forces may not align completely with our national development policies. And so there should be some consensus on how to align these national development policies and the market-driven policies that we have now. So another question that we can ask is, are we starting to catch up? Because if we compare ourselves to the other Asian economies, we are rather quite late in the game by at least 25 years or even more. And so some of the important observations that some experts in STS and of course in economic development have said that the Philippines cannot adopt the model that was adopted by Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, and China around 35 years ago. Is because the technology environment we have now is very, very competitive, because these economies already have developed and producing a lot of innovative commodities. So we have to find our niche and aggressively develop it. So perhaps that's one direction the Philippines can go to, but we have to identify what that niche would be. Perhaps it's in the development of innovative technologies to deal with disasters and massive environmental changes. It could be that, okay? Now, I think you have seen post-normal science, so we won't dwell in this, but I hope I would suggest you still read the part in the module about post-normal science, because this would be the one that you would apply in your real-life cases with respect to the face-to-face class proposal that we are working on. And I think citizen science, we already have taken a bit of it in the post-normal science lecture, which has been pre-recorded. And so I think that's about it for this module. We need really to improve the knowledge base for our economic and social policies. And perhaps that's the biggest science and technology challenge in our current development agenda. Now, the DOST has come up with, and I think I've told you about this, has come up with the Pagtanaw 2050, which is a foresight policy document that sets directions for science and technology development until the year 2050. And I think we have already identified the sectors there which we could be technologically competitive. That's our niche in fulfilling our development goals. But that would need a lot of investment. The question is now, where will the investment come from? There are sectors that said that if we further liberalize our economy, then foreign direct investment may be the one that will fund it. Okay. But of course, while that work in countries like Singapore, we should have certain conditions for that to happen. For instance, the government can set a policy that there should be technological exchange or capacitation of the local sectors. if we invite foreign direct investment. And I think in one of the cases that we dealt with for the INGSA, the Dumbelain case, actually, that's what we talked about in class. That's one of the investors are just willing to put in the money, but they're not really willing to develop the technological innovativeness of the citizens of that fictional country. And I think most of you recommended another investor to come in, another foreign investor. And so that's about it for science and development module. And in our STS class today, this semester, we are actually applying that for more on the real life cases of science policy and advice, which is for this semester, it's the face-to-face class. So think about your face-to-face classes, how innovative should we approach it, what technologies need to be used, and if the state needs to invest more on science and technology to make sure that we are in school safe from public health threats, such as a looming variants, new variants like Omicron and things like that. Perhaps that should be one of the major recommendations that you make. Okay, so with that, I think I could say that's about it, and I wish you a good day.